All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Day One Founder Story. I'm Andrew, founder and CEO of Day One, and I'm excited to talk today with our guest, Sam Cooper, who was a Day One fellow in which fellowship was it, Sam? It was our
Second one.
second fellowship. Man, time is flying by. There's been a lot of founders through Day One, but no, you were one of our original early fellowship fellows. And so welcome to the Day One Founder Stories. Excited to dig into some of your journey and talk about what you're working on.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm really excited to be here and hopefully share a little bit of my story.
Yeah. I mean, I know some of your story, and what we like to do here is just unpack what it's like for entrepreneurs to get into the game, and then what it's been like as you've been building, working, pivoting, kind of what it's like to live the life of an entrepreneur. So, but just the sort of easy one for you to get us started, so that folks can kind of know where you're coming from. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, tell us about kind of where you're coming from, whether it's your professional journey, other influences that have sort of led you to entrepreneurship. What's the sort of backstory behind Sam and what you're building today?
Sure, great question. So I'm on my second startup. About 3 weeks in on that, possibly addicted, for better or worse. I kind of have a pretty like builder engineering background. So for the last decade, I've really been, you know, in the trenches, building, engineering, innovating, hopefully innovating, working with teams. And that's been a lot of fun. And that's where I sort of thrive. That's where I am most comfortable. But in the last couple of years, I've kind of pushed myself out of my comfort zone, or I've tried to at least, realizing that I can maybe make a bigger impact, not just by being an individual contributor, but by sort of helping teams grow and sort of accomplishing bigger things and bigger challenges. So I'm a technologist, but in a good way. I'm really always looking for opportunities to tie technology back to people in human need. And the thread that's kind of tied together the last couple projects in my career has always been um, improving decision making and doing that through technology and taking more data driven approaches. So making things a little more scientific, a little more rigorous, and hopefully combining that, blending that with human intuition, expert insight, that sort of a thing to make decision making more effective, more faster, speed up learning loops, that sort of a thing. So that's a little bit about me and who I am, and yeah, go from
That's
there.
awesome. I mean, that sounds like you're working on projects that are very much you, like you said, a technologist who cares about actual needs and problems, and it's bringing those technologies to bear for the good of the people you're serving or the folks that you want to solve their problems for. So it kind of makes sense that you're finding better ways to use data. Data is definitely one of those kind of core pieces of technology today. The big data, the fuel for the AI that's kind of taking over the world. So that's a really useful background. I know more than our listeners, and I see the through lines coming through. So um, tell us. You also alluded to a little bit of what you're working on. You're working on decision making. You're working on helping people use their technology and their data for to kind of be better operators, to be better whatever's, I guess, right? Whatever they're doing. Tell us about, though, this is what I like to click in on, right? So you've been an entrepreneur, been entrepreneurial, you've been a technologist, a builder. Maybe in this most recent go at it, what are some of the things that were sort of like causal to you kind of jumping in, right? Whether that was going from the projects that you had or the job or the individual contributor to the next thing. What were some of the tipping points for you that have pushed you over the edge to this project, to this business, or to just entrepreneurship in general?
Sure, great question. It's I, I'd be lying if I said if it was one specific point in time. I think that conviction sort of has built over the course of my career. Initially, I started out, I had the worst imposter syndrome, known. I remember, one of my first software engineering jobs, looking around and hoping that nobody noticed that I didn't really know what I was doing. And what I kind of realized was that that's normal. That feeling isn't unusual. In fact, it's almost unusual not to have that feeling to some extent or another. And as I kind of leaned into that a little bit, and started to embrace just learning, absorbing from others, taking in information, and realizing that I have a lot I can contribute to, that conviction kind of built up. I think it certainly changed as I started to move more towards into more leadership roles and team lead roles, and sort of being more of a facilitator, and big picture thinker. That conviction sort of kind of, and confidence that kind of goes along with it, kind of increased as well. But of course, that has to be balanced with the humility, of listening to others and being what I call a servant leader. So, that's just something that's kind of evolved, I think, over the course of my career as I learn about who I am a little bit more.
I love that. I mean, entrepreneurship, you have to sort of believe that you can make a dent in the world, right? That you can take something that's not quite right and not just solve it, but kind of build a machine or business to keep solving it or solve it sustainably or to solve it in a bigger way. Um, Besides that sort of like building, growing sort of confidence in your abilities and the ways that you can make that impact, what's led you to this project, right? What kind of drove you to and maybe even tell us a little bit about the specific thing that you're working on so we can kind of know sort of where you've gotten to. But what were sort of the tipping points for you that kind of have come together to kind of push you over the edge for this thing that you're working on right now? And what is it called? Let's give us the name.
Sure. Automata is the name of the business and the name of the platform I'm building. So yeah, we're kind of positioning ourselves right now to be what I call a data experimentation platform. And so if you're sort of familiar with how things are done, mostly largely marketing, and now it's sort of evolving downstream into product development and software engineering. But everyone there's an awareness that things like A/B testing and multivariate testing and certain types of simulations and things that are typically put in the world sort of data science and stuff are really valuable and really important ways of learning and gaining insight about your clients and customers. Unfortunately, they're also fairly complex and require a lot of expertise, perhaps a data team or data science team, lots of data, maybe lots of users. So in practice, even though there's an awareness that those things are valuable, not that many organizations, at least smaller organizations, are really doing those things in a continuous loop. And that was kind of something that I observed as I kind of went through industry. And it got me thinking, how can I make that process easier? How can I, and really a big motivation for me, I think a lot of the technology that we have, especially in like the data space that I'm in, is is technology for technologists that I call data practitioners, which is awesome. The industry has come a long ways, but if you are not that, if you are a business user, and let's be honest, these are the folks that often have the deepest insight about how the organization works and what the data actually means. It's kind of inaccessible to you. This is why you still see people using, spreadsheets and, outdated reports and broken dashboards, and the list goes on. So for me, a big inspiration is bridging that gap, the gap between the technical and what I call data practitioners and the users, the people in the business, and most importantly, like the customers and clients that, and those that the organization serves, by building better tools that have the right layer of abstraction, the right level of abstraction, such that both communities can kind of have the right level of responsibility and kind of collaborate effectively. So that's a little
this is really you. This is really your, like, the idea is sort of your persona of a human-centered technologist come to life, which I love. I feel entrepreneurs do need to be building sort of within themselves. And that's not to say that it has to be a passion project, right? This kind of sounds like something that gets you jazzed up. So that's really great. But I don't like to put that on entrepreneurs, because you can do things that you see an opportunity and go get it. But it really does help when it's like, no, I would probably be doing this on the side anyway, right? I would probably be doing this, or you had been doing this and sort of built a career out of it. But the other thing I was going to comment on, and I think what you're building has like so much potential, is the history, as I understand it, or as I kind of make sense of it over the last decade, has been this sort of like, we're adding layers of software from like the base stack. Like at first, someone it was novel that there was a cloud platform. Then eventually AWS is now competing with Azure, is now competing with Google Cloud. So we've taken care of platform. Now we're moving up the stack of like, infrastructure to the app layer. And I think what I kind of see you doing is there's these kind of industrial tools that exist in the data BI kind of space, maybe the marketing tech, where those things all meet. And you're moving one step closer to the user, where it's, like you said, like one less layer of abstraction where it makes sense and is usable for the customer. I see this kind of thing as like, I mean, this is where the world is going. You're going to allow non-technical people to do things that it would take a very technical person a lot of time just a couple years ago, right? And you're empowering entrepreneurs all over. So I get to that point to say, like, I love that thread. I love empowering not just entrepreneurs, but, you know, digital workers, entrepreneurial people, right? To just do more, better, faster. Of course, save organizations tons of money, but yeah, you're really empowering a lot of people to make these big next steps. I don't know if that does anything, or you have a thought to jam on with that.
That's so perfect. I am flattered by that. It's exactly right. I think making the technology accessible is the real challenge, and it's hard. It's hard because, you know, there's so much complexity, and to your point, there's so many layers of abstraction. And building tools that really can both empower, you know, the digital native workers, the knowledge workers, as well as, you know, the highly technical people that are kind of under the hood,
Right.
tweaking the knobs and dials. It's that's a you know, that's a gap right now.
Yeah.
But it's that challenge is something that fuels me and gets me really excited, and it's something that I think, you know, has the ability to unlock a lot of potential. So for sure.
Absolutely. It's kind of in the same vein of like no code, right? If I get my like philosophical hat on, I'm like, all software is no code. I get to use Excel instead of writing, you know, a query in basic or something, right? Kind of
Sure.
thing. They've made something code, not code, right? Anything can be done with code, but an app is an abstraction layer. So
Go ahead. Yeah, I like to the no code, you know, movement. The moniker no code is important. I think I think it's been an overall great boon to the industry. I kind of think about it as code optional or code flex.
yes, there you go.
I think that's really where things have to evolve, because if you build things that are just no code, they're always going to have built-in assumptions and limitations that limit their use by the, you know, those who want to go the next step. So I
Right.
think
Which anyone who's used Squarespace has felt that, right? They're like, oh, this is good for like the very basic website, but you're playing at a middle layer. And I think I completely agree with you. I think a lot of people would.
yeah,
So you mentioned that this is like the challenge that you're excited to bite off, but I want to ask you about challenges more of in the process, right? So this big meta problem you're solving gets you jazzed, but what's it been like? What are some of the things that you've had to overcome? Maybe some learning, some lessons that you're taking away that you could share, that you would pass along to a peer, somebody who's maybe thinking about this kind of thing, just in general. Like, what are some of the things that you're kind of working through and working on that that you're taking away as you go through this entrepreneurial journey?
yeah. I think right now I'm in the thick of sort of idea validation. I have more than an idea. I have some pretty cool, you know, technology I've been working on and prototyping. But in terms of a business model, I'm at an idea phase, and I'm trying to be real with myself about that. Um, and I guess from sort of a lessons learned perspective, I think if, and this kind of runs against my own instincts, so it's tough for me. But if you don't have, you know, real validation and you're building something elaborate and time consuming, stop, rethink, think about how can you shorten that feedback loop. So I'm kind of going back to basics. I'm like deeply engaged in, you know, customer interviews, and I'm just learning. I'm taking it in. I'm not even proposing, you know, these ideas I have at this point. I'm really just hearing what actual, you know, people are experiencing and how I can hopefully make their lives a little bit better. But it's hard. It's hard because the feedback you get isn't always consistent. It's hard to know, you know, I'm building experimentation platforms. So I'm always thinking, am I asking the right questions? You know, is my sample size big enough? You know, when do I stop? So there's a lot of questions about, like, even idea validation is a bit tricky. And doing that in an effective way, I think, is something that I'm really learning as I go, but it's been a great experience so far.
I'm glad you said it. I'm usually the one who's kind of pulling a builder back from their coding to be like, have you talked to a user today, yesterday, last week? So it's amazing, and it makes sense. You're building a platform to experiment, that you're living with that mindset. Man, you teed up so many things that I think are kind of very essential to the entrepreneurial like journey, and the kind of that intuition in the gut that an entrepreneur builds, which is like, when is it enough? Or am I really learning? Do I have enough data, whether it's a sample size increase, or did I ask the question the right way? So I want to click in on that. Like, how has that been? Like, how are you learning to trust whether it's the data or your gut or the thing in the middle when it comes to these like interviews and stuff? Like, what have been some of the things you have been able to learn, maybe an example or two, but also, yeah, but how has it been to like develop your intuition, or at least your sense of when you're getting where you need to go, or when you're not learning something, you have to reset it. That whole journey, how has that been going for you?
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, it's not without its ups and downs. I think an approach that I've taken that's been working pretty well is setting my expectations before I start to, like, in other words, if I talk to 10 people and then after talking to 10 people try to make a decision, if was 10 people enough, then I'm going to fall victim to confirmation bias, of some sort. Even if I know that that's going to happen, I'm still going to fall victim to that. So before I even start, these interviews, these discussions, I often think to myself, how many people what am I trying to figure out? How many people do I think, what's my intuition at this point? Because largely it does come down to, at some base level, to an intuition about, how far to go. And kind of checking myself against those initial set of expectations, which you can evolve, but always kind of like document your expectations up front. The other thing is just the soft skills, I think, of learning how to even just get people to talk to you. It's not always like, initially, my network's been great, and I've used my network and made another hop to, like, second tier people within my network. But you exhaust those people to some extent, especially if you're targeting some more niche customer segments. So just figuring out how to engage with people, and I'm asking them for their time and really offering little in return other than an opportunity to for them to voice their perspective. So how do I word that? How do I frame that in a way that is authentic and genuine and resonates with people? Not an easy task. I'm still learning. So
No, and it's like the beginning of everything entrepreneurial, which is there's a little bit of a sale in there, right? There's a little bit of, reality distortion, which is like, no, this is really fun for you to talk to me because I'm creating a new world and you're going to be a part of it, or whatever that little carrot is. And I love the thought, like, I'll just repeat it for everybody, knowing what your hypothesis is, even if it's not even about the end game, but when are you going to have enough data, right? What's going to help you, whether it's the number of people or a consistency of responses. I'll kind of just like riff with you for a second. One thing I go into interviews with is I'm looking for consistency. And so if I start to not hear consistency, maybe then I'm either going to keep looking or I'm going to say, no, we're actually just like not even in the game. But when I start to hear 5, 6, 7 people say similar things, then I start to know, right? And it's about having an expectation of what you're looking for going in, whether it's like soft like that or the number of people or the metric, right? Sometimes it might be that clear, right? Where you can justify anything after the fact, right? And so knowing ahead of time, that's a very rigorous way to go about entrepreneurship. So those are 2 really important, I don't even know if I call them mindsets or sort of attitudes, right? Where they need to show up every day. They need to show up all the time.
Agreed. And I'll throw one more in there, just the willingness to pivot. I think especially early, that's kind of the one advantage I think we have as early founders in young startups is we can pivot on a dime. And it's scary sometimes because it does, you wonder, am I going to be perceived as being wishy-washy? Yesterday I was talking about this today, but no, that's exactly when you need to pivot, and do so, quickly. So I think that's helpful.
Yeah, I love it. And there's so much more we can go into that because those 3, I mean, you kind of hit like the big 3, right? Experiment, pivots, and figure out like how to trust your gut. So that's amazing. Talk to those users. So last question as we sort of wrap up, which is, where are you now? Like, what is, and I like to ask this question because I want folks to kind of see, not just like how the idea is forming and what you've been doing, but like, what's it like being just a few weeks into a business? What are you working on next? Is it a customer you're trying to talk to? Are you shipping a prototype? Just like a little bit of like what another, a month down the road begins to look like for you, Sam. And what are some of the things that you're facing?
Yeah. Right now I'm kind of doing 2 things. I'm trying to build myself a little community. I think that's one of the hard things about being a founder. You're not in a company that's already got this organization all sorted out. So if you're going to have community, you kind of got to find it and create, and maybe even a little bit create it. So there's all sorts of communities, and I've found, kind of, for me at least, what's been working is sort of 2 types of communities: people who care about you and people who really care about the problem you're solving. And maybe they're the same, maybe they're not, but if you can find those both and find your kind of place in those communities, that can be a huge, superpower effectively. Moving forward, I'm also obviously I'm hyper focused on idea validation. Once I get to a certain point I have in mind where my business, idea has been validated, and I have a business model around that, and I can then create some traction, probably in the form of letters of intent, pre-sales, that kind of a thing. And then I can go back to building, maybe bring in a team, look for, I have some ideas and sources of funding, and kind of start to scale a little. But right now I'm going solo. I'm keeping my runway as long as I can, burning as low as I can, and just getting to a point where my ideas are no longer ideas, they're validated hypotheses.
I love it. Love it. Well, you seem to be taking an amazingly structured approach to this. You're a founder after my own heart. I love to see it, making the right kind of setting yourself up for success, knowing what those runways look like, knowing what you really need before you go too deep, too fast, too hard, in any direction. So Sam, it's a pleasure to be chatting with you. Awesome to see what you've been building. When you were in the fellowship a long time ago, I know you've moved into different directions, and it's cool to see you pivot as an entrepreneur and kind of launch this next new project. And so really appreciate you unpacking it for us and what you're up to. So do you have a website yet, or is it still sort of in stealth behind the scenes?
I have a domain, and there's a coming soon page up. So coming soon.
Got you. Very, very, very cool. It's
automata.io is the URL. So you can sign up for the mailing list if you want.
Awesome. Can you spell that literally? Because I'm like automata. Okay.
Automata. Yeah, it's kind of like automata, which but automata. So AUTOMANA.
Gotcha. So maybe I would have been able to spell it right. Automata.io. Amazing. Sam, thank you for joining. Thank you for sharing. Really appreciate this. Guys, that's been another Founder Story. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Andrew.
Always. All right, take care, everyone. Bye now.